welcome back to another Wednesday build. Today, I decided to add my own weld seams. Yeah, I know, I said I wasn't gonna do it, but things took a bit of a turn when I got to the turret. You know, those moments where you tell yourself, I'll just fix this one little thing, and suddenly it's a full-on reconstruction project. Yeah, that's where I ended up. So, stick around, there's a lot of improvising, some questionable decisions, and maybe even a few ideas worth trying on your next build. So, why did I decide to do the weld seams? Well, after 80 plus years of sitting out in the elements, baking in the sun, freezing through winters, these tanks would have taken a serious beating. They definitely wouldn't look factory fresh from 1943 anymore. Honestly, it was bugging me just looking at it. It was starting to resemble a rusted pristine tank being restored instead of an old wreck decaying in place. So yeah, it needed a bit more roughness to really sell that look. Now, adding your own weld seams can be a pretty daunting task, and honestly, if I were building this as a tank fresh from 1943, I probably wouldn't bother with it. Well, who am I kidding? I probably still would. But truthfully, it's not something every build needs, and once you've got the right tools, a small chisel set, and a steady hand, a bit of patience, it actually becomes a pretty straightforward job. Like most things in modeling, it just takes a little practice and the courage to mess it up once or twice. One thing to note about this chisel, it's thin, but depending on the angle you use, it can act wider than you think. Use it flat and you'll get a nice broad seam line. Tip it up higher and it cuts sharper and deeper. I usually switch between a low angle and the backside with the higher one. Those two approaches seem to work best for me. You'll get the feel for it as you go, trust me. Now, when it comes to older kits that don't have any weld seams molded in, well, that's a whole different ballgame. We'll save that adventure for another day. Alright, I added a lot of footage of this part because I really want you to see the full process. No cuts, no tricks, well, there's a few cuts. Just how it really goes. So while that plays, let's ramble a bit. What do you build? I assume armor since you're here watching my channel. Cars? I've tried, but I'll be honest, they usually end up meeting the wall in frustration. I don't know what it is, maybe the whole painting, the interior firsting, or having to glue painted parts with my arch nemesis, CA glue. Planes? Same story. Great kits out there, but they can just be like cars that fly instead. Now, I do have a B-17 in 1/72 scale I picked up at the thrift store for $2.99, and the USS Ronald Reagan kit for the same price. But if I build those, YouTube algorithm will probably scold me for wandering off into other genres. So, what do you think? Should I risk it and try something different, or stick with my rusty armor for now? For now, I think I'll stick with armor and not risk upsetting the mighty YouTube algorithm. Besides, I usually grab those other kits just for greebly parts anyway, cause sometimes I dabble in spaceships, but not too often. Never know when a random BC-17 engine part will come in handy on a tank build. Well, maybe never. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, alright, back to the task at hand. Once I start adding those epoxy weld seams, I'll need to go back and clean up all my oops moments from the chisel work. And oh boy, coming up next, the turret was a real challenge. I'll definitely need to spend some extra time fixing that one. Here it is. Those curves. The problem here was that I didn't exactly follow my own advice from earlier in this video. I started out using a larger chisel, and by the time I can't go there. I realized my mistake and switched to a smaller one. It was too late. Typical, right? I think I can fix it with a bit of Tamiya putty. Though, and if not, well, maybe it'll just look like an extra bit of aging on this restoration tank. Happy accidents, right? Well, not exactly. Sometimes with modeling, you really do create extra work for yourself, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? Then there are those times when everything just clicks and you step back, take a photo, and proudly post it online like, look what I did. It's all part of the process. Even when something goes wrong, it's never the end of the model, just another step in the journey. One more tip, keep both the channel you're creating and your tool clean. If you don't, it's easy to lose sight of your work and accidentally jump out of the channel, scratching the surface, or worse, injuring yourself. This tool can make some pretty deep gouges in you and in the model too. You might notice parts disappearing throughout this video. That's just me knocking them off, so this isn't the ideal stage for this, but here we are. You can see the smaller chisel is making much cleaner lines. I chose the larger one for the outer welds since they need to be a bit wider, but if you start with the smaller chisel first, you can decide afterwards if you need to widen the seam. Without risking your work, modeling can be a bit of a guessing game, but it's always safer to err on the side of caution, especially with a more expensive kit. Have you ever dreamed of a workbench stacked with everything you can possibly need for a model? Not just paints and glue, but all the bits for stowage or extra details. I could never quite get there. Maybe I sculpt a few bedrolls or gear from epoxy putty, but that ends up using a lot of material. Imagine being able just to reach for anything you need to finish a diorama. That's my ideal setup, my dream anyway. And with a 3D printer, the possibilities are endless. Track links, tools, little details, anything you can imagine could just be printed. Just really exciting thought. Come on, Santa, bring that sleigh full of goodies. Well, I'll have to get it myself. Going a bit old school here, but I've been thinking about picking up some of those classic Berlinden plaster buildings. The idea is to mold them and make my own copies, and then I could customize them without touching the originals. Back in the day, I'd add my own details by sculpting bricks and other textures, and that hands-on work was really satisfying. I'm also curious to try out those AK foam boards. They're supposed to be softer than those Home Depot stuff, or at least less dense and easier to carve. It all comes down to diorama details. Sure, a 3D printer can do a lot, but there's some stuff you just can't print, or at least it's much harder to get that same effect. Next up, we'll be adding the weld seams using Tamiya Epoxy Putty. This step is actually easier than carving the channels, and once it's done, the model really starts to come alive. When you follow it up with paint and a pin wash, those seams will really stand out and give the tank a much more realistic look. Here's what I use to make my weld seams: a bit of card to roll out the putty noodles, a hobby knife, some clay tools, and my homemade weld imprint tool. Once you got a nice noodle rolled out, just start laying it into those channels you carved earlier, or I carved. I use a little water to keep it from sticking to everywhere but where I actually want it. This step can be a little frustrating. Sometimes the noodle goes right where you want it, and other times it wants to fight you every inch of the way. Once you finally get it to stick, use your clay tools to gently push it into the weld areas. Just remember to wet the tools first, or the putty will cling to them like it owes rent. One quick note before you start rolling out that putty: make sure your work area is clean. I had some overspray left from airbrushing and it got all over the noodles, and it made it a lot harder to stick to the areas I wanted. As for that airbrush booth, Yeah, I still can't bring myself to spend 100 to 150 on one just yet. Those silicone tools, though, they're worth it. They make shaping the welds so much easier, and you can find them online or at just about any hobby or craft store. Probably more your craft store. While you watch me fill in these weld areas, let me tell you a little story. Once upon a time in a faraway land. Oh, okay, fine. We're just going to ramble. So, as you know, I do Instacart, and today I took I'm Italian again, one of those truly awful orders. I didn't look at it good enough. You know, the kind, 8 cases of soda, 3 huge packs of water, and a mountain of snacks. And of course, it was at Sam's Club, where everything weighs as much as a small car. And that's what I have, a small car. The whole time I was loading it, I just kept chanting to myself, 3D printer, 3D printer, 3D printer. That's the motivation right there. Alright, I don't want to bore you to death talking about my job, so let's get back to the build. When you're mixing up the putty, try not to make too much at once. By the time you've filled a few seams, the leftover stuff will start drying out and become useless. Once you've done this a few times, you'll get a feel for it. Oh, getting Italian again. How much to mix, but honestly, I still mess that up all the time. The best way is just to pick one area to focus on, mix a small batch, and go from there. And if you need more, just mix some more. Keep in mind, I'm making my welds a little bulgy, if that's even a word. Since this thing is supposed to be 80 years old, yours should probably be a little cleaner and lower if you're going for a factory fresh look. I'm still using my homemade tool made from a Coke can, which has now split at the end, but hey, that's a total Bob Ross moment. The split actually helps me make better texture marks in the putty. I'll also go in with my hobby knife to add a few more details. Just be careful not to touch your previous welds while working. Fingerprints in epoxy don't exactly scream precision and craftsmanship. You can also use that blade to trim off excess putty where it's too wide or just doesn't look right. If the putty's still fresh, you can even slice the top off to lower it a bit, kind of like giving your weld a haircut. Now, what do welds actually look like? That's a good question. It's easy to see them clearly on modern restoration walkarounds, but those are 80 years after the fact and often cleaned up and redone. The original welds were laid down in German factories by hand under war conditions, so they look quite a bit different. It's hard to make out in those old black and white photos. Honestly, someone should make a book that's just about weld seams. Factory styles, techniques, the whole bit. I'd buy that in a heartbeat. And I remember reading this somewhere, that they actually had like a 360 device that would hold, the whole tank or just the lower hull, and they were able to get the welds in on the bottom and just spin the thing around. Not sure about that. Maybe someone can chime in below and let me know if that's true or not. I was having that issue with the putty not sticking, so I just scraped that section off and moved on to areas that were actually cooperating. Sometimes that's the best move. Don't fight it, just shift gears. The nice thing is, once you finally get through this part, it really pays off when it's time to paint. That brings up a good question though. What's your favorite part of the build? The actual construction, the painting and weathering? For me, it's doing stuff like this, adding weld seams, armor texture, and those little surface details that make the model come alive. It's the kind of work that feels tedious in the moment, but man, it's satisfying when you see it under paint. Or over. Under? Over. Over. That's it. Sorry. Using the blade to shave down some of the putty, kind of like Bob Ross would say, a little cabinectomy. Do you remember that? I keep using him as a model reference, don't I? Must be showing my age. I remember watching him on PBS when that was the only way to catch the show. Now you can stream it anytime you want. I always loved the sound of that palette knife scraping the canvas, long before AMS was even a thing. Alright, I've got to do it. A good old PBS ramble. What was your favorite show growing up? Of course, there was Sesame Street, back when Snuffleupagus was still a Big Bird imaginary friend. I still remember the day they finally revealed him to everyone. And the Electric Company. Hey, you guys! That intro still gets stuck in my head. Oh my god, and I don't even mention Mr. Rogers or Zoom. Does anybody remember Zoom? Okay. But my favorite, there was this one show where a guy would tell a story while drawing it. And at the same time, I can't remember the name. But man, that was magic. When you were homesick from school, just zoning out and watching PBS all day. The good old days. Alright, enough nostalgia for now. Let's get back to the build before I start humming the Reading Rainbow theme. Oh, copyright. Can't do it. Usually adding weld seams takes forever. But even with my putty hiccups or mishaps, things are going pretty well. I thought I'd need to smooth out the top of the turret with some extra putty, but it's actually looking good. Is it a little wide? I kind of think it is. Maybe, but the original welds were like that too, so I just followed the pattern. 80 years later, I think we can let that slide. Hopefully. Remember, you're also seeing it before I use the knife to fix some of those spots. In the end, making some chicken sandwiches. You hear the beeping? Okay, sorry. I was happy with how it just looked and just kept going. These welds were molded smaller than the outer edges, and they came out pretty well. My putty is starting to dry, so I need to hurry and get all the weld marks in before it sets. These voiceovers always make me hungry. And by the way, my rambles are genuine. Yes, that PBS one was a whole new level, and I love those memories flooding back. Hope you enjoyed them too. Now, rushing to get all my imprints done, I'm finishing up the turret. Sometimes when doing this kind of work, it's easy to accidentally touch areas you've already done. So, as I've said before, always check before setting it down to dry. Sometimes, well, at least for me, it's hard to know when to set it down and call it done. I'll often go over it multiple times until I finally say, that's enough, or until it starts to get really dry. Oh, and I'm using the Tamiya Epoxy Putty Quick Type. Forgot to mention that earlier. Anyway, I've never tried the smooth type. It's much softer, so I'm not sure how well it would hold up. I'm running low of the quick though, but it really does last quite a while. Well, that's if you're not making a bunch of little bedrolls with it first. I'm just about done here, going over all the spots to make sure every weld seam has a nice imprint. Sometimes it's easy to miss one, and I've done it before. And of course, checking that there aren't any big fingerprints ruining the effect. Since we've got a little time left, it's a ramble time. Can I top my PBS nostalgia story from earlier? Maybe, maybe not, but let's see where my brain takes us. Alright, maybe it'll be a ramble about models. We'll see. Okay, model ramble it is. I've been trying to figure out what got me hooked on models in the first place. Probably my older brothers building them, or those trips to the hobby store where the shelves were stacked with incredible box art, Airfix, Monogram, Revell, and others. Some of that artwork was just jaw-dropping. Funny enough, YouTube recently suggested a channel where someone interviewed an artist who actually painted a lot of that classic box art. I just have memories of like a Stuka in its dive bomb, or a Spitfire hot on its tail and that Stuka's in flames going down. Those were some iconic box arts. I'd love to have some originals, though I'm sure they cost a fortune. I wonder if anyone sells reprints. Well, anyway, she's spinning now, or about to, and here she is. So we are ready to end this video. So, hope you enjoyed this Wednesday video. I want to give a big thank you to everyone supporting my channel and watching the content. Alright, I will see you in the... Ooh, we got like 10-15 seconds, so it's going to be a long see you. See you in the next... No, still can't do it. Copyright. Alright, see you later.